I'd like to start off this video by saying I respectfully apologize for my heater coming on and off, but the wind is blowing 90 miles an hour. And honestly, I don't like being cold, so we're going to be rocking the heat tonight. Also, with these wind sounds, it is reminding me of how it sounds in the Upside Down on Stranger Things. Been watching Stranger Things, just finished season 5, volume 1. I think that's what it was. Awesome. It was incredible. I've been watching Stranger Things since it came out, and honestly, one of my favorite Netflix series ever, rivaled only by The Ranch. Really, I'm a big fan of The Ranch. A lot of people ask me, how big is the jump from electric guitar to steel guitar? And I say, the electric guitar is like driving a Toyota truck. The steel guitar is like driving Air Force One. It's a big difference. And we're going to get into kind of some of the differences in this video. The biggest difference, I would say, is just simply how much is going on. On the regular guitar, you're using both of your hands and about 20% of your brain power. On the steel guitar, you're using about 75% of your brain power. I don't think it's possible to use 100% of your brain power, unless you're 11 from Stranger Things and she can move stuff with her mind. But playing steel guitar has got to be pretty close to that as far as difficulty goes. So you're using about 75% of your brain power, and you're using both hands, both knees, both feet, and they're all doing different things. Whereas on guitar, your two hands work in conjunction. Your two hands have to work in conjunctions more precisely on steel guitar, as well as being able to bend strings with your knees and your left foot, and then control the volume of the entire masterpiece with your right foot. So it's just generally a lot more going on, and it requires immense coordination. And it takes time to develop your coordination on any instrument, but particularly steel guitar, just because of how hard it is. Okay, the next big difference is intonation. On the guitar, you have these magical little silver things called frets. And what frets do is allow you to not only see where your note is in tune at, but also feel where your note is in tune at. That's why you see players like Stevie Ray Vaughan, Eric Clapton, John Mayer, and myself close their eyes and get massive guitar faces going on because you can feel the note. Okay, and I love that feeling. But on steel guitar, that does not exist. On steel guitar, you have a visual cue of about where the note is. See, that's the thing with fret markers, and I had to learn this from Jeff Newman. Jeff Newman, by the way, if you're getting into steel guitar, is a lifesaver. He will save you tons of time. In my opinion, he's the greatest steel guitar teacher of all time. Right alongside Paul Franklin. Paul Franklin's an awesome teacher. And it's great to see somebody like Paul Franklin, who has played on so many hit records, but still has the patience to teach beginner players who have never picked up the instrument. That's an awesome feat. One of the most important lessons I ever learned from Jeff Newman watching his videos was that you have to constantly be moving the bar in little micro adjustments. The reason for that being is that intonation is never guaranteed. On steel guitar, we're kind of hovering around the note and using our ear to find the note. It's not always the easiest thing to just go and find the right note right off the bat. Sometimes you have to overcompensate or undercompensate a little bit. But on six-string guitar, you don't have that problem at all. You just play between those two silver things and you're fine. Okay, another big difference in steel guitar and regular guitar is your tone bar. You're having to move this tone bar around above frets that don't exist. They're just visual markers, and try to find the right note. So your ear has to be perfectly calibrated and perfectly in tune all the time. Otherwise, you will sound like a garbage disposal. As far as the right hand goes, most guitar players play with a pick or a plectrum. I personally like to play with my fingers a lot just because they can vary the tone a lot more. Now, you can with a pick as well, and I tried to do that as well, but I'm not Stevie Ray Vaughan. Stevie Ray Vaughan could sound like Baba Black Sheep one minute and sound like Moore, Oklahoma 1984 F5 Tornado the next minute, just how hard he could hit the strings. Okay, but I'm not that guy. So I use my fingers a lot. I like guitar tone from Dwayne Allman, Derek Trucks, John Mayer, Dickie Betts did it some. Just those guys who could really get a lot out of with their fingers. So yeah, I highly recommend getting into that if you haven't already on the guitar. But whenever you switch over to the steel guitar, you would now have 3 picks. You have a plastic pick on your thumb, you have a metal pick on your index finger, and a metal pick on your middle finger, traditionally. Now, some people use 3 finger picks and 1 thumb pick. I'm not that guy. I just do the traditional way. You know what? If it worked for Lloyd Green and Paul Franklin, it's going to work for Walker Robinson. So that's kind of my philosophy on that. All right, so there is a huge learning curve to be had with learning how to use the tone bar, learning how to use the picks, learning how to use your knees, learning how to use your foot pedals, learning how to bend your ankle in ways that you've never bent it before, and learning how to control the volume at the same time as doing all these other cyberspace type movements. But don't give up on me yet. A lot of your chord theory, if you understand chord theory at all, your chord theory will transfer. So say you know all the notes of the top string of your guitar, that will transfer over to the steel guitar on your E strings. Typically steel guitars are tuned in E9. So at least, unless you're Alex Miller, he could play C6. Anybody good can play C6. I'm just not that guy, so I stick to the E9. It's where the money is made. Having said that, if you strum all the strings on your steel guitar in succession, you're not going to get a nice sounding chord at all. You have to know which strings to hit in the right combination. Some of the preferred string attacks that I like to use are 10-8-6, 5-8 and 4. That's a huge one that I love. Or 5-6 and 8. But 5-8 and 4 gives you an octave of the E string, and so whenever you're bending your E's, which is another big steel guitar move, you can really accentuate that move and that change. So if you're doing resolution, you get a high and a low octave. So it's really cool. You should try that out if you haven't. Once you find your position on the steel guitar, say we're playing in G, you put your bar on the 3rd fret, just like your top string on the guitar would be your 3rd fret. And now you have access to the 1, 4, and the 5 chord very easily. So on the E9 pedal steel, we're going to press down the A and B pedal, and we're going to play a string combination such as 5, 8, and 6, or 6, 8, and 10. And you're going to have a G chord if you're playing on the 3rd fret, or at least close to a G chord, because bar hand etiquette is a real thing and intonation is not easily obtained on the steel guitar, but theoretically you're playing correctly. G on the 3rd fret, then you mash down the A and B pedal at the same time, and that will give you your C chord, which is the 4 chord. Then you go up 2 frets or down 2 frets, either way you would want to think about that, but you go from the 3rd to the 5th fret and mash down the A and B pedal, and that will give you your 5 chord. So it's all right in there together. And then if you want to play a 6 chord, you can take your foot off of the B pedal, play only the A pedal, and you've got your 6 chord. So it really works out with chord knowledge, but you have to have chord knowledge going into it, otherwise you're up the river without a paddle. So the right hand on the steel guitar is immensely more complicated than the 6-string guitar. We've already kind of covered that, but I want to go into a little bit more detail. So with the steel guitar, you have all these combinations of strings that can make interesting sounds, and then you have your bass root of combinations that can give you your standard major, minor, whatever chord. And then you have the 2nd string. Now the 2nd string on steel guitar is one that few explore, but when they do explore, it can result in some very interesting sounds. One of the coolest 2nd string licks is Nobody in His Right Mind Would Have Left Her by George Strait. Paul Franklin plays a 2nd string lick. Da, 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 da. So he's bending 1 string up and 1 string down at the same time. So one of the right hand masters of the steel guitar, in my opinion, is a modern player who is playing with Coulter Wall. His name is Muskrat Jones, and if you haven't checked out Muskrat, you need to. He is absolutely incredible, and I really really respect his playing, because he can play that 60s country, Dickie Overby style steel guitar pretty well unmatched, to at least what I've heard. I mean, that style of country music is so interesting to me because it's basically all 4/4 shuffles with a walking bass, but they come up with new licks on every song. See, that's one of the things that can inspire you, is if you think that you have run out of licks to learn, you have only scratched the surface. And I learn licks all the time, new stuff that I never thought of playing. And that is the one best thing about the steel guitar community, is that people are just completely fine with robbing licks. It's just an okay thing. Whereas on guitar, you play like Smoke on the Water or something stupid, people are going to say, oh yeah, Deep Purple. Whenever you play like a, it's hard for me to explain this stuff because I don't have one in my hands. But whenever you play like a lick that, hang on. Whenever you play a lick like, Stevie Ray Vaughan would do this thing where he bends the string, then he goes a half step down and bends the same string, and it gives a little real bluesy effect. And this guitar hasn't been in tune in approximately 6 years, so that probably was terrible. But, Stevie Ray Vaughan was awesome. I love Stevie Ray Vaughan. I know Eddie Van Halen was the talking point of last week's video, but Stevie Ray Vaughan's this week's talking point hero. And for the final point, one of the things that I valued the most about switching from guitar to steel guitar is how open arms the steel guitar community is. Whether it's Steel Guitar Forum or Steel Guitar No Drama on Facebook, that's an awesome group where you can learn a ton of stuff. Or even the best steel guitar players in the world, they are always willing to help out the beginning player, and they want to see the instrument live on. I want to make an entire video talking about my steel guitar journey and kind of how I got from beginning to where I am now. But without going into too much detail, I will say this. The people like Cowboy Eddie Long are what keep this community going. Cowboy Eddie Long is a world-famous steel guitar player. He's played with Hank Jr., he's played with Confederate Railroad, Kenny Chesney's early records were Cowboy, and most notably, Jamie Johnson. Want to talk about prime steel guitar right there. Cowboy Eddie Long is a master of the steel guitar. And I met him in a studio session in Muscle Shoals, Alabama. And basically, he took me under his wing and just mentored me like a son, which has been a life-altering experience. I remember driving around listening to that Lonesome Song, Jamie Johnson, which in my opinion is one of the greatest modern country steel guitar albums ever, if not the greatest. I remember riding around listening to that with, my uncle and stuff when I was just a little kid, and him pointing that steel guitar out to me. And then I got to learn firsthand from the guy that did it. And that is what the steel guitar community is all about. See you next time.